Committee to order. First up on the agenda is request for introduction of bills, and I believe we have one from Senator Ware.
We do. I've forgotten the RS number. Did you write it down for me, Connie? Do I have,
Jason? Do you happen to have the RS number for Senator Ware's bill that she is wanting to introduce to the committee today?
I was not made aware that Senator Ware was introducing a bill today, so I'm not sure which bill we're talking about. Sorry.
I tell you, with time constraints that all our committees are under, we'll just wait and do that tomorrow or next week. Is that okay?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
if Senator Ware describes her bill with sufficient specificity, I can track down the bill request and get that noted for introduction. But it's up to the chair whether or not to require an RS number.
Senator Ware, do you?
it has to do with exotic animals and ownership and such of exotic animals for public health and safety.
That will work. Thank you.
Committee, you've heard the request. Are there any objections to this bill introduction? Seeing none, that bill will be introduced. Thank you, Senator Ware. Do we have any other introductions for bills? Seeing none, we will move on to our next order of business, and it will be agency presentations. First up, we have Doug Jorgensen, our State Fire Marshal. Doug, welcome to the committee.
Better? All right, sorry. I think everybody has a copy of my presentation. I will just go through it briefly and sort of hit the high points. And that'll take us all the way ready to page 3 for an agency overview. It simply gives the agency mission, philosophy. Our agency is completely fee funded. We receive no state general fund monies. We currently have 70 employees at the office. We have approximately 33 that work out of the Topeka office, and the remaining 37 that are spread out across the state with responsibility for different territories and regions in the state. With COVID, we currently have reduced our in-office staff from those 33 to no more than usually 4 a day, and everybody else is teleworking from home. Going on to the next page, the agency mission. It just breaks down the agency by division, our administrative division and the responsibilities there, our investigation division, our fire prevention division, and then also our emergency response division, which is responsible for the state hazmat response program and the state search and rescue response program. The next couple pages give the committee a little bit of update on the status of wildfires in Kansas. There was an increase in fires in 2020 over 19, but you'll see on page 5 that even calendar year 19 and 20 are still 2 of the lowest years over the last 10 years. So we've done a lot better job in responding to the wildfires in the state, both at the state and local level. The next page is the acreage that actually is burned in the different years with wildfires. The majority of the fires are 1 acre or less, some 10 acres or less, and the smaller percentages are over 100 acres. So again, we have a number of fires every year, but they're still on the smaller scale, and they're able to be handled by the local fire departments and their local, other local departments in that area that assist them. And then just a breakdown of the actual acres burned by wildfires for the last 10 years. Moving forward to page 8, the agency update. Since last session, we did discontinue our Kansas Firefighter Recruitment and Safety Grant Program and our smoke alarm program for this fiscal year because the amount of funding that we're getting from the insurance premium fund, which is well over 90% of the agency's funding as a whole, has not kept up over the last few years with the requirements of the office. So we discontinued those two programs this year. We're confident that we'll be able to possibly bring them back for next fiscal year, and we'll see how we're able to work through our budget committees this session and see if we're able to accomplish that. The only other item I'd like to, I guess, point out is that at the end of last session, there was a budget proviso that was approved by the legislature, and our office was asked to take over the industrial hemp processing program in the state. Department of Ag still is involved in that. They still oversee the actual growing of the industrial hemp and the harvesting of the industrial hemp. But once it leaves the farm or the ground and goes to an actual processor, where it's then turned into other things like CBD oil and stuff, there was no state agency that would oversee that or that was overseeing that. So Department of Ag, the Attorney General's office, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation approached our office and asked us if we would be interested in sort of taking that project over. So we're in the process of right now just working under a proviso, but there is legislation at the revisor's office that should be coming out hopefully yet this week, if not the first and next week, that will give us that authority actually in statute. And we actually have been working on temporary rules and regs for that process. And those temporary rules and regs were approved last Thursday. So we're moving forward with the current facilities that are processing and working with them going forward to educate them on the rules and regs, get their input on the rules and regs, and make any changes to the rules and regulations for that industry during the current process before they become permanent. So agency COVID-19 response, just a breakdown for the committee on the amount of dollars, extra dollars that we spent in FY20 and FY21 on the COVID response pertaining to our office. Most of that being on PPE for all of our employees, improving the telework capabilities of the agency, some extra administrative expenditures, for additional cybersecurity since we were having so many people work remotely. And all of those funds have been reimbursed to us at this point in time, and we don't foresee any additional expenses that we might have to ask for CARES money or whatever the case might be going. Again, we've reduced our office staff from around 33 to usually no more than 4. We have been able to finally stock up on PPE for all of our employees. We've had to issue additional PPE because CMS, Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services, actually came out with new guidelines. So for our inspectors that were going into the hospitals and the care facilities that were under the CMS umbrella, not only are they wearing gloves, masks, but they're also having to wear either goggles or face shields. And we're having to provide them with their own sanitizer and things and not rely on the actual facilities in using their supplies. Recently, over the last week, set out all of those additional supplies to all of our inspectors. Our administrative division, again, for this session, we're concentrating on the firefighter recruitment and safety grant program. And it gives some information on the amount of funds that we have given out with that grant program over the last 4 or 5 years. And then there's also some information on the amount of smoke alarms that we've given out across the state over the last few years. And for the committee's information, the governor did recommend in her budget recommendations restarting the firefighter recruitment and safety grant at $100,000 for next fiscal year, and allowing us to spend up to $50,000 next fiscal year for the smoke alarm program. We are excited about getting those two programs back and moving and getting that extra safety out, not only to the firefighters in the state, but to the citizens. 14, just some stats on our investigation division and their numbers for the last year. Next page, same thing on our prevention division. Short update on our emergency response division. We have been able to do some training for our hazmat teams and our search and rescue teams, but COVID very much limited of training we could have, because those two groups, it's a lot of hands-on, sort of shoulder-to-shoulder training. And so we had to discontinue a lot of that training over both last fiscal year and the current fiscal year. We're hoping to restart those. The numbers in Kansas look to be going the right direction, and we hope to restart a lot of that training this spring and bring all that training back through this fiscal year. See what happens. And we have been able to leverage some federal dollars for some of our hazmat training. In fact, we were able to leverage a little bit over $100,000 in U.S. Department of Transportation HMAP grant money last year, and I actually just signed a couple applications for some additional HMAP money. So we're reaching out and finding the funding wherever we can and utilizing whatever dollars that we can find besides our state dollars or our fee fund program to provide the necessary training for both search and rescue and our team. Going to page 18, our financial outlook. It's a history for the committee of our fee fund. There's been no changes to the amount of money we receive from the fire assurance and premium funds for a number of years. In fact, in FY 2004, it was split, and the Board of EMS and the University of Kansas Fire and Rescue Training Institute were added. The amount of funds that we received from the insurance premium fund actually took a fairly significant drop in 04. We've been able to get back to that 04 level over the last few years. But again, with the additional responsibilities that our agency incurs from time to time, and the fact that we sustained a little bit over $9 million in sweeps over about a 4 or 5 year period of time, not too long ago. It's made our financial situation pretty tight. So one of the things that we're asking for in this particular session is an increase in the amount of money that we receive from the insurance premium fund. Right now, 1.25% goes to our agency, the Board of EMS, and KU Fire and Training. Of that 1.25%, we receive 0.8%. And we're working on a bill in the revisor's office to increase that, our share of that premium by 0.2% to a full 1%, which would increase the total from the insurance premium fund. Doesn't seem like a whole lot, but it's a pretty significant increase for us for our funding. I think will help us get through the upcoming years, remain solvent, and not have to come to the legislature and ask for any SGF. And then on the last page, session priorities. Just a brief note there about the sweeps that we've experienced. Our plan to ask for the 0.2% increase in the insurance premium fund. The other thing that's on our list for this session, and I'm not sure how successful we'll be, is for the last couple of years, we've been trying to start a recruitment and retention program for our agency. We continue to experience the inability to attract qualified personnel for openings we have. We continue to lose the people that we've had that have experience or that we've invested, $4,000 to $6,000 in training in the first year to other local agencies, insurance companies, and other places that can pay more. And we basically turned into sort of a revolving door. To be able to attract a more qualified individual, because that's an issue for us right now with our salaries. But then once we get them there and we invest in that training and time, we're trying to keep them and not have them move on. That's another priority for our office. We've introduced SB 79 this session. That just actually defines our fire investigators' police powers. It's been a question mark, and the bill's been introduced for the last couple of years, but we've never been able, especially last year with COVID, we just weren't able to get any movement on it, get anything done. So we're working on that again this session. And then again, working on the new industrial hemp processing program.
Thank you for your presentation, Doug. And we have a question from Senator Peterson, then Senator Foscato.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On 16, you were talking about some of the training. Have you been able to get good training response from these teams and people in the COVID situation?
Actually, the classes we have done, we've been able to fill, but we've reduced the numbers on those classes. So we continue to get a good response. We continue to get a good response from the firefighters across the state that are part of our hazmat and search and rescue programs. And some of those departments are not able to send people. Some are. So it's a little bit of a combination of not only their willingness to attend, but our ability to still hold the training, but having to reduce the numbers of the people that are actually in the class. We can have the social distancing that's needed, have the separation.
Senator Foscato, then Senator Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in your presentation, I can't remember if you said the governor's budget or if you said just a grant, you mentioned $100,000. Would that also help? I know in the past, we've talked about volunteer firefighters in some of the rural areas that, we thought that they might need to be compensated somewhat of what they do. Would that be able to help them?
It would. The whole emphasis for our firefighter recruitment and safety grant, that is actually something that we put in place just for volunteer departments. We don't allow full-time departments to apply for those funds. Some of the volunteer departments across the state have annual budgets of only $10,000 or $12,000. Set of bunker gear for one of their firefighters can run anywhere from $4,000 to $6,000. So a lot of this grant money that we put out, they're able to buy new bunker gear for the firefighters they have and any new ones that they bring on. Part of the grant also is we purchased the industrial type washing machines so that when they do have that bunker gear, they can wash it and clean it, keep it clean, because another issue that the fire service has, there's a documented uptick in cancer in the fire service. A lot of that is from them when they continually wear that bunker gear from fire to fire, and it accumulates carcinogens and things from the fires on them. Every time they put it on or they put it in the back seat of their personal vehicle, they're still breathing those carcinogens. So we're buying those industrial type washing machines and encouraging them to wash their bunker gear on a regular basis and try and help with their on the health side.
Senator Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So your inspections of the industrial hemp, and that happens after it leaves the field is where it starts, where it's at a processor? Can you describe what that looks like? I'm sure none of us know very much about all that.
Yes, the Department of Ag started that new program 2 years ago now. And they were in charge of it, and it was a research program attached to their office. But it's grown, and they were coming out of the research side of it. And so Department of Ag is still overseeing the actual growing of the industrial hemp. It's their responsibility to make sure that it's statute requires it to be 0.3% THC or less. So it is tested, and if they find any hemp that is growing that's above that, it needs to be destroyed. And then anything that stays under that 0.3% is harvested. Once it's harvested, those farmers or producers sell it to processors. And those processors, we have about a dozen facilities in Kansas now. And we've been approached by maybe 4 or 5 others that are thinking about starting a business. What they do is they accept that raw hemp after it's been dried, and then they process it in a couple different ways. And they process it mostly into CBD oil. But the issue where we've gotten involved is some of the processes they use sometimes chemicals or a lot of heat. So we are regulating the actual fire and life safety side of their facilities to make sure that they have smoke alarms, fire alarms, that they're safe for the employees to work in. And then in that processing of the hemp into like CBD oil, there's byproducts that come out. One of the major byproducts is pure THC, which is illegal in the state. So that's where our investigators are overseeing that part and making sure that there's good bookkeeping, accountability of that THC, how it's being destroyed, making sure it's being destroyed properly, making sure it's not ending up out on the street. That's the majority of
Thank you, that helps.
Committee members, do we have any more questions for Doug? Seeing none. Doug, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time.
Committee will now turn our attention to our next presentation by Joe House. He is the Executive Director for Emergency Medical Services Board. Welcome to the committee, Joe.
Thank you, Vice Chair Hildebrand. Members of the committee, my name is Joe House. I am the Executive Director of the Emergency Medical Services Board. We are the board responsible for the oversight of ambulances, ambulance services, and personnel, EMTs and paramedics that go on those units. So the board itself is a 15-member board, 11 that are appointed by the governor, and then there are 4 legislators on our board as well. Of those 11 that are appointed by the governor, we have 3 EMS providers, we have 3 physicians, we have 2 county commissioners, one of which has to represent a county smaller, with a population smaller than 10,000 people, 1 hospital administrator, 1 EMS educator, 1 that represents the fire-based entities that provide EMS as well. And then, as I mentioned, those 4 legislators. We have 2 from the Senate, we have 2 from the House. One of our senators, the only senator that we have right now, is ranking minority member on the committee, so Senator Pasco. We are vacant on our majority party at this point, so I'll be reaching out to the Senate President to ask for a recommendation. Moving forward on there. On the House side, we have Representatives John Epley from Atchison and Representative Broderick Henderson from City, Kansas, Wyandotte County. Our board meets 6 times a year. Statutorily, we're only required to meet 4, and then just once each quarter. We had that change in the 2019 session. The board has stated that they'd like to continue to try to meet rather frequently, just so we don't lose any ground on some of the advances that we're doing and as we move towards those long-term goals. But it does give us that added flexibility to cancel meetings when things such as pandemics pop up, and down to what we need to. So we do also have as I mentioned in there, we only have 3 physicians on our board, but sometimes medical standards and practice require a little more insight than just 3 physicians. And so we have a medical advisory council as well that we assist with. Their job is to provide the board with medical standards and practice and recommendations moving forward on that. That group of physicians are all actively engaged in the provision of EMS. We currently have 12 members on that board, or on that council, sorry, and 13th probably will be appointed on Friday by our board. These physicians, again, actively engaged in EMS, but represent all portions of the state of Kansas. So we've got them from rural areas, we have them from urban areas, we have them from the in-betweens as well. So it is a great council to hear all sorts of different ideas as they're coming through, and they've done a tremendous job of providing us good advice on the medical standard side. I won't go through our board's purpose, mission, long-term goals and such. That's all on the page 3 of the testimony I have there for you. But we'll just go into a little bit more with just 2020 in general. And so we had quite a few challenges, not only within the agency, but also within EMS in Kansas. And so we watched at the very early onset of the pandemic, a significant drop in patients requesting transportation. 28% drop in 911 calls for medical assistance, a 40% drop in requests for interfacility transports, so those hospital-to-hospital transports. It caused quite a bit of havoc for our services. As you very well know, our ambulance services only receive reimbursement if they transport patients. And so watching transport volumes drop made a lot of counties and cities and very nervous as to how they were going to continue to fund that response and provide that service to their citizens. So group gathering restrictions that were kicked in forced our EMS educational institutions to start to think outside the box. They couldn't necessarily convene classes of 15 and 18 people. They couldn't hold test sites with 40 or 80 people. And so they had to quickly adjust, and by quickly I mean in a matter of weeks, to how are we going to switch things to an online platform? How can we do remote learning and still achieve that distance learning and achieve our goals? So In addition with that, and we saw the examination sites that offer our state examination reduce because they too were struggling with how do we pull in 40 people to take a 2-hour test? How do we pull in 80 people to take a 30-minute test? And go on with that. So we watched a lot of testing centers close. We watched a lot of skills examination sites postpone until they could get that figured out as they were going through. And then late in the calendar year, we watched hospital bed availability drop. So available beds, places to send within the state of Kansas became hot commodities. That was a changing dynamic by the minute. Very hard to determine which hospital you're going to send this patient to. Typically, by the time you get all the calls made that have to occur, that bed might be taken. And so we watched a good number of patients being transported out of the state of Kansas from facilities simply because it was the only available facility in the area. So our peak for a pandemic response in EMS was really the week of December 4th. That was our apex. That is the high point. And had us at the board level really concerned that we were going to have to look at contingency plans to assist with staffing. We saw staffing shortages hit as more EMTs and paramedics contracted the virus. And a 14-day quarantine puts a pretty significant impact into these staffing situations where they're staffed simply to just continue to run. So we were set, ready to move forward with mitigation to kind of help offset that. We didn't necessarily want to bring in a whole lot because that, again, decreases revenue within the state as well. And so it was a step we were ready to take, and luckily didn't have to do it at this point. If there's a third wave, history has shown us that will probably absolutely be necessary as we move through. So just some of the actions that we took within those first 2 to 3 weeks are listed there. We offered a lot of pathways to try to get more people into the state to eliminate any barriers to having, if I had this EMS provider that was just recently expired, we went ahead and offered it. As long as they're working with an ambulance service, we could still validate their competency, their training. We allow them the ability to continue to function for a period of time with that ambulance service. We looked at vetting members of the National Guard that may not have necessarily held Kansas certification, but held all of the requirements to become so if necessary. And so that brought another 165 persons into the state that we could utilize, and talked with the Adjutant General. We could deploy if necessary to assist. We had roughly about 1,000 people call in and say, hey, I'm willing to help. I'm currently certified. I'm not with an ambulance service, but I'd be more than happy to help one that requests that need. So we maintained that database, allowed them to requests come in for assistance. We would shoot out the names to those services for them to reach out and assist as necessary. We developed multiple guidance documents in those first couple of weeks. Anywhere from an EMS 101, here's how you operate in a pandemic situation or with an infectious disease. It's things that they knew, but just wanted to bring it back to the forefront of their minds so that they could be hypervigilant on it as we were going through. Offer different strategies. Something as simple as just send one person in full PPE, protective equipment, in order to determine whether or not it's really necessary for everyone else to come in with all that same equipment, especially with shortages going on. We looked at disinfection of an ambulance. How's that done safely? How's that done in a meaningful way? We provided that guidance as well. And then finally, we developed a staffing mitigation plan. So gave them a template to use as an example. If they needed, I'm going to be short 5 people the next week. What are the steps that I need to take in order to maintain regulatory compliance, but still achieve the mission that we need to get done of providing that care? And then the last bit that we did is we pushed very hard to have our EMS compact that we were a member of activated. We've been in the midst of rules and regulations and writing that as we're coming through. We're still early in our infancy, only a couple years old on that compact side. I am the EMS compact commissioner for the state of Kansas. I sit on that board as well and their executive council as well. And so we ask to activate it. What the compact does is most easily equates to your driver's license. When you go to Missouri, you don't think about contacting the Division of Revenue or Department of Motor Vehicles over there to get your driver's license in the state of Missouri. You simply go through and drive because they say your Kansas license is good. Now you're gonna follow our laws. You're gonna drive our speeds. You're gonna stop when stop and yield when yield. But we trust that they've taught you that in Kansas and moving forward. So that's what our compact does. It's not necessarily like some others within the state, like the nurse licensure compact is a multi-state license, which means if you're licensed in one state, you're licensed in the other. That's not what ours does. Ours offers that privilege to practice. So if they're requested to cross over that state boundary, they can go into that state boundary, function as if they're in the state of Kansas, but whatever state that they're in still has jurisdiction over what they do, and they have to follow their laws. We pushed to get that activated. It was activated March 17th. April 17th. And it's been a paper process, which is a struggle. We've approved about 1,000 folks to cross over state lines. We do have roughly about 2,700 responses that go across a state line into a compact state. Our only surrounding state that is not a member of the compact right now is Oklahoma, and we're pushing pretty hard. We really strongly believe that between Texas and ourselves, we can squeeze them into getting compliance here, hopefully, shortly. It'll help immensely. We have a lot of very near border, large jurisdictions between Liberal and Park City and Coffeyville that would benefit from this, requested constantly there. So the pandemic also brought some tremendous lessons so far, and we're excited to see what else it brings as we go through. But this really proved that we have our regulations in a great place. We didn't have to set aside regulations. We didn't have to look at emergency movements to get that switched so that something would be allowable. The flexibility that as the educational institutions came through, we were already outcome-based. We didn't have a set number of hours. We didn't require them to always have in-person training. We gave them the tools that they needed within our current regulations and then the flexibility that they needed to just adapt, do what they needed to do to get the job done, and met our regulations. That we feel is a very strong testament to the board having those regulations in the right spot. Second piece was a validation of our board's effort in getting 100% of EMS data into our EMS data repository. So we're currently at 99% of all responses going into that system, provides us a near real-time look. I look at it right now, tell you any responses that have occurred as of 8 a.m. this morning. Most of the state of Kansas. Gives us the ability to take that data, to tweak, modify, to watch, to see how changes are going through within the system and to assess that. We have tools that we provided the services to do the same thing at their level and then benchmark with their regions with services of similar size and volume, and actually the ability for the state of Kansas to compare ourselves to other states as well. And then last, we have huge testament on the examination side is even when the examination testing sites were shutting down, we had the ability to roll out, the Board of EMS is a mobile testing site for our computerized testing. So we deployed it and we went out into the communities, brought the test to them because that was a whole lot easier for us to appear for 4 people in an area than for them to come to a testing center that had 30 or 40. So we had that figured out. We deployed that resource. We tested folks as going through our skills examination sites. We already had that modified to the point where numbers were down, and our processes are now being looked at by other states because we didn't have to shut down the pipeline in the state of Kansas. We still allowed our folks finishing their courses to gain their licensure, gain their certification, and become EMTs and paramedics in the state of Kansas. So our most recent activity on the pandemic response was just clearly identifying that specimen collection can be done by anybody that's CMS trained. There was a little bit of concern about that. But the fact that I can watch a 2-minute video and self-do it, it seemed to be pretty in line with allowing EMS providers to be able to do that. Then our last document was just clearly identifying the EMTs, AEMTs, and paramedics, 3 of our 4 levels that we certify, have the ability to administer COVID-19 vaccines and influenza vaccines, especially with the vaccination push as we're going through. And we understand there's going to be a huge need for vaccinators moving forward. That should add about 7,500 folks that are actively involved in the service and another couple thousand that are not, that would be potential vaccinators into this state. So I want to stress that we were prepared for this. We were ready for it. Our continuity of operations plan is why we only expended about $300 in additional funds to be ready and to deploy during fiscal year 20 and have had no expenditures related to the pandemic in 21. We had the ability to go remote on a moment's notice because that was part of our continuity plan. So we just executed our plan. I think a tremendous job for the state. We took those pieces and parts that we knew we could set aside temporarily, and we set them aside temporarily. We're now back to full service. That December area, we reduced our inspections again just because we thought it was probably fairly, well, not necessarily the safest practice to send folks from one side of the state into the other side of the state and potentially be transmitters. But we followed our continuity of operations plan. It worked tremendously. We could not have been successful without the 10,634 EMS providers in our state, without the 166 ambulance services working as hard as what they're working, without all of the city, county government, you folks, the hospital boards, and then the corporate structures for our for-profit services doing exactly what they needed to do. So 2 items and then I'll be done. Or stand for questions. Reimbursement issues are a real thing in EMS in Kansas. They're woefully under reimbursed. There's been no reimbursement reform, very little, reform in the last 18 years. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services are looking at cost reporting for ambulance services. That was year 1 was supposed to be last year. They set that aside. So year 1 actually begins this year with some of that cost reporting data. The average cost of transport is about $800. Currently, Medicare reimburses less than $400. Medicaid reimburses at approximately $250 for transport. It's a pretty significant hit for those folks taking that. But we are looking at building the business model so that we can work reform using education and evidence and present that hopefully to you folks or to the state Medicaid director and work on getting that taken care of, at least what we have control over. Annually, we are required to provide you a report of civil fines and penalties or civil fines that are issued by our board and any investigative subpoenas. And so the last pages of that testimony 4 through the end are that report. So we issued on there, I believe it was 1 investigative subpoena through the calendar year. And these are folks that we don't necessarily regulate. So in this instance, it was a city county government that had an ambulance service, but it was a personnel record, and they felt that it would be safer for us to go ahead and subpoena that personnel record as opposed to just providing it as part of the ambulance service records. So we complied, issued that investigative subpoena. And then those 48 civil fines that were imposed, a majority of those were continuing education audits that were failed. And rather than taking away certification for minor infractions, the civil fine was really the more appropriate tool to use in those situations. And so those 48 civil fines totaled $7,825 dollars. That amount goes directly into the SGF. The board does not see any of that. it's intentional, because we don't want this to be ever seen as a money-making opportunity. The last piece within that annual report was our sanctioning reference points for continuing education audits. We felt that the easiest way to consistently apply, especially when we're looking at 500 continuing education audits, and roughly about 20% of those falling into this system, to apply some sort of a sanction is to have a template that goes off of fact and yes, no answers. And so that tool at the very end is what we use for determining where that fine ends up at. Worked very well for those folks that we used in August, and the board has decided to continue to use that moving forward and modify where necessary. My presentation, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair, and I am more than happy to stand for any questions.
Joe, thank you for your presentation. And looks like we do have a question from Senator Dietrich.
Mr. Chair, if I heard you correctly, you said that during 2020, you didn't have to expend any additional dollars for equipment for COVID-related issues. No personal protective equipment. You had it all there?
Not for the agency ourselves, no. The ambulance services absolutely had all sorts of expenditures associated with the response.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure I understood that. I had another question. I've forgotten it. Sorry. Maybe you'll come back to me later.
Go ahead. I don't see anybody else except for Senator Foscato. So go ahead and continue with your question, then we'll go to Senator Foscato. Oh, Senator Foscato.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Joe, Mr. House. So, Mr. Chairman, committee, I want to share that, over the years, we've had different directors for the EMS board. Joe House, you've been the best so far. And the responsibility that you've had, I know that the board recently gave you authority to make some major important decisions on behalf of the EMS board here in the state of Kansas, since we don't meet all the time and we're in all different parts of the state. And so if you could share some of those responsibilities that you were given, I think they were so important. And then if you could just share, because I know I won't be at the Planning and Operations Committee meeting that I serve on. We are not in session. We don't meet tomorrow, but if you could just share with the body though and I won't be there either Friday, but if I were, share with them how that meeting goes and then some of the responsibilities that you were able to have and make for us. Thank you.
Thank you for the very kind words. Yes, the board gave me some tremendous responsibilities, decisions to make on behalf of the board. During the pandemic response, majority of those were things that needed to happened in between meetings. The board did give me the ability to make set aside regulations if we needed to offer variances as we needed to approve those. And then to bring those back to the board at their next meeting to ratify that decision or to vacate it. They've allowed on the sanctioning reference points. I can utilize those without bringing those back to the board. If necessary, I can issue any of those subpoenas without coming back to the board to ask for those to be done. Those are the big ones. Luckily, those are tools we haven't had to use often. I appreciate the trust that the board gives me, but I prefer to just use those in those extreme circumstances, and especially moving forward as we go through. With the meetings, the structure that we do have 4 committees that meet. The Planning and Operations Committee covers exactly what it says. It's the planning and operations for EMS in Kansas. We have an executive committee that deals with grant administrations. We administer roughly it's about $750,000 in grants annually. It's what we disperse out, and that's executive committee. That's the final approval on those as we go out. We have an education incentive grant designed to bring on, recruit, and retain individuals in rural areas. We have an equipment grant that we offer to cover the large capital outlays that perhaps some of these smaller services, like the fire marshal had mentioned, those budgets of $12,000 and $15,000 are real on EMS as well, and a $25,000 monitor is hard for them to fit within that 15,000 that they have. That's why that education grant exists. And so, or sorry, the craft grant, our equipment grant exists. And then our last two committees that we have is an education, examination, training, and certification. So basically the issuance of all things education related, and then our investigations committee that deals with all the disciplinary matters. That typically occurs on a Thursday, complete day of meetings, and then our board meets on the following Friday to recap, rehash, and then any items that are significance goes through on that following Friday. A day and a half of good solid meetings. A lot of information gets shared in those 6 meetings. It's amazing that we can get that much stuff done in 2 months and have something to report out upon.
Committee, do we have any more questions for Joe? Not seeing that. Joe, thank you for your presentation. We have nothing further on our agenda. So with that, we will be dismissed. Thank you.